sneeze and I can breathe. Long as I'm breathing, justice will be served.
Remembering the man whose death has renewed life in a movement. While the world came to know him only in the last few minutes of his life today, George Floyd was remembered by family and friends who knew him best. Policing the police. A newly released body camera of a deadly encounter in Texas. The New York City officer surrendering today after being charged with violently shoving a female protester to the ground. Meanwhile, President Trump tweeting a conspiracy theory about that elderly protester in Buffalo seriously injured by the police. And the president drawing a line in the sand, again slamming calls to defund the police. Republican Senator Joni Ernst joins us. Infections on the rise. The alarming rates in at least 21 states with a rise in COVID cases. Healthcare systems in the Southwest unable to handle the demand, just as many places have almost fully reopened. COVID-19 in the Amazon. How the coronavirus has made its way to one of the most isolated and vitally important regions of the world, now facing a new threat. And mailing it in. As voters head to the polls today, we have a closer look at how mail-in ballots might work come Election Day in the fall. But will there be enough? Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. For decades, protests, sit-ins, and marches have attempted to highlight racial inequality. But what may finally be moving the needle is what happened 15 days ago. A death captured on video by a teenage girl on the street in Minneapolis. The killing of George Floyd is prompting demands for change from people around the world. And today in his hometown of Houston, Floyd's family called for his death to not be in vain. They remembered the man known as Big Floyd, a father, a brother, and a friend. Many of those who came to honor Floyd did not know him personally, but they feel personally impacted by his legacy. The 46-year-old man who cried out for his mother as he took his final breaths under the knee of a police officer today was laid to rest next to his mother. Our Marcus Moore leads us off from Houston.
A moving final farewell for George Floyd in Houston.
I believe that a change is gonna come.
Hundreds of family and friends gathering to remember Floyd, the child and then the man they loved long before the movement.
The world knows George Floyd. I know Perry Jr.
The star high school athlete with a big smile and sense of humor, a gentle soul, a loyal friend, a protector.
I thank God for giving me my own personal Superman. God bless you all.
He was an umbrella to all of us. He was 6'6". Any rain came our way, he made sure that he could cover for us.
I want justice for my brother, my big brother.
Their brother calling out to his mother in those final moments of his life.
When he called out for his mama, we believe that the ears of mamas across this nation reared up, that the ears of mamas across this world heard him cry, even though for one mama, all mamas began to wail.
Inside the church, NFL star J.J. Watt and actor Jamie Foxx here to pay their respects. Just a day after meeting with the family, former Vice President Joe Biden sharing a video message and these words for 6-year-old Gianna.
Daddy's looking down. He's so proud of you. No child should have to ask questions that too many black children have had to ask for generations. Why? Why is Daddy gone? When there is justice for George Floyd, we will truly be on our way to racial justice in America. And then, as you said, Gianna, your daddy will have changed the world.
A regular man from the streets of South Houston, whose legacy now may be a catalyst for change.
If 4 black cops had done to one white what was done to George, they wouldn't have to teach no new lessons. Until we know the price for black life is the same as the price for white life, we're going to keep coming back to these situations over and over again. And we should recognize the mother of Trayvon Martin. Will you stand? The mother of Eric Garner. Will you stand?
One by one, the Reverend Al Sharpton calling on those who've shared the Floyd family's anguish.
All of these families came to stand with this family because they know better than anyone else the pain they will suffer.
Tonight, George Floyd's final journey. Crowds lining the streets of Houston as he's laid to rest beside his beloved mother.
And Marcus Moore joins us now live from Houston. Marcus, no word from President Trump today, but we did see in your piece that video message from former Vice President Biden. And he was also met with the family in recent days as well.
Yeah, that's right. He did meet with the family, and what was interesting about that is, you know, as we know, we're coming up on an election year, and there were references to the White House, and more or less a number of speakers did criticize President Trump during the services today, not only for his rhetoric, but also for how they say he has handled these past couple of weeks, and it certainly seems to be top of mind when they look ahead to what this is going to mean in the days, weeks, months, even years ahead, Lindsay.
And Marcus, what has the mood been like among the people there on the ground in Houston?
You know, it's been a somber one for sure, but also, as they said during the service today, this is a celebration. Today was meant to be a celebration of George Floyd and his life, and certainly there are fond memories of Floyd and his impact on the lives of the people he met. But it is so clear, Lindsay, that he had a huge impact on strangers, and I have met so many people here at the mural that has been created on the side of a neighborhood market in the 3rd Ward of Houston where he grew up. People who just wanted to come here to see this spot. And Lindsay, they feel like what happened in Minneapolis and these past 2 weeks will represent a turning point. And a lot of the people I've met, Lindsay, are optimistic. They believe that this will lead to positive changes and also reform as it relates to police departments across this country.
Yeah, certainly lots of optimism and positivity and hope. Marcus Moore for us in Houston tonight. Thanks so much, Marcus. And what will the impact of George Floyd's death be? We have heard the calls to defund the police and push back from some lawmakers. Is this moment somehow different? Tonight, we're learning of 2 other men in police custody who also said, "I can't breathe," before they died. What will the impact be on policing in America? For more on that, our Alex Perez has more.
Tonight, newly released body camera video of a deadly encounter with police, this time in Austin, Texas. From March of last year, it shows Javier Ambler's last moments alive. Police say Ambler failed to dim his headlights as he drove past a deputy and resisted arrest. In the video, you can hear him saying he cannot breathe several times before becoming unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at the hospital, initially ruled justifiable homicide. The case now under investigation. And Oklahoma City police releasing this video of a deadly incident. Derek Scott died after being arrested over allegations he passed a fake $20 bill at a taco truck. He, too, can be heard saying he cannot breathe.
I can't breathe. I don't care. Okay.
His manner of death ruled unknown, and all officers were cleared of any wrongdoing. This incident happened in May of last year. The video was only released yesterday after Black Lives Matter members demanded it. These videos and others coming out as the cries to reform or even defund police departments and procedures grow louder.
Defund the police does not mean zeroing out public safety budgets. What it means is taking money from law enforcement and reallocating it.
L.A. announcing major cuts to police funding, Seattle considering a 50% reduction, and New York redirecting funds to youth programs and moving a bill forward that would ban chokeholds, with criticism mounting police unions in New York and across the country defending officers.
This isn't stained by someone in Minneapolis. Stop treating us like animals and thugs and start treating us with some respect.
But sometimes dismantling a police department is seen as the only or best option. Camden, New Jersey was considered one of the deadliest cities in America for years. They disbanded their entire police department in 2013 and rebuilt it from the ground up, and saw improved community relations and a dramatic drop in violent crime.
We invested heavily in training and teaching cops how to de-escalate situations so that they didn't make bad situations worse. And if they didn't follow the policy, we took pretty swift action to rectify it.
And we're joined now by Alex Perez from Minneapolis. Joe Biden and some other prominent Democrats have distanced themselves from the call to defund the police. What type of line are these politicians walking, Alex?
Well, Lindsay, the short answer is they are walking a very fine line in all of this. A lot of politicians are. The truth of it is, it's the activists, organized activists that have been hitting the streets the last couple of weeks who are crying the loudest for defunding the police department. We know that President Trump has said that is something that he is not interested in. And as for Mr. Biden, well, he sort of has talked about the issue, saying he is not interested in defunding the police department, but would consider other proposals, like, for instance, putting conditions on federal money that goes to police departments. He's also talked about things like creating a national database for cops accused of misconduct. So it seems a lot of the politicians looking at all this right now are walking a fine line as this moves forward, Lindsay.
And as we've been reporting, there's a plan to dismantle the police right there in Minneapolis. Where do those plans stand right now?
Yeah, Lindsay, you know, the majority of the city council here supports disbanding the police department, but at this point they have not provided any concrete details or explained how exactly that would happen or when it would take place. So a lot of unanswered questions here. A long debate in the weeks and months ahead are expected, but they've tossed around ideas like, for instance, having firefighters respond to cases of drug overdose. That's one of the ideas. Or having social service workers respond to certain mental health cases as opposed to the police department. But all of this is really up in the air and no one has any concrete answers right now. It's not even clear if the city's charter would allow for the disbanding of the police department. So just so much to still figure out here, Lindsay.
Our thanks to Alex Perez. And let's move now to Washington. Lawmakers are working on their own set of proposals aimed at reforming the police. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows met with Republicans today on Capitol Hill, but offered very few specifics on what, if anything, the president would support. The president himself has not weighed in, but he did take the time to promote a conspiracy theory that the 75-year-old man shoved by police in Buffalo might have been faking it all. Chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl breaks it down for us.
As George Floyd was honored and laid to rest today, and lawmakers in both parties gathered on Capitol Hill to address the national outcry over his death, President Trump stayed out of sight all day. Out of sight, but still stoking division. Promoting a new conspiracy theory, the president made unfounded allegations against a 75-year-old protester named Martin Gugino, the man who was pushed by police in Buffalo last week. The police officers leaving him behind as he laid motionless. Two police officers have been charged with assault, but this morning the president tweeted Gugino could be an Antifa provocateur, charging the senior citizen appeared to scan police communications in order to black out the equipment, adding, "I watched. He fell harder than was pushed. Was aiming scanner. Could be a setup." The president was citing a bizarre report by fringe right-wing television network OAN. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo fired back at the president.
What do you think it was? It was staged? Do you think the blood coming out of his head was staged? Is that what you're saying? You saw his head hit the pavement. You see blood on the pavement. Maybe he fell harder than he was pushed. How reckless, how irresponsible, how mean, how crude.
But on Capitol Hill, most Republican senators ducked questions.
What do you make of the president's tweet this morning? And does the president need to be more cautious about what he tweets?
I didn't see it, so I'd have to. I mean, I'm sure that my office will be able to get me a copy of it, but I didn't see it.
The only Republicans willing to comment were those who have already been written off by the president.
It just makes no sense that we are fanning the flames not at this time. This is not good.
It was a shocking thing to say, and I won't dignify it with any further comment.
Not even the president's own chief of staff would defend the tweet.
I learned a long time ago not to comment on tweets.
Jonathan Karl joins us now from the White House with more. John, this is not new from this president, but many are finding this tweet rather jarring.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you see it with those members of Congress, those senators coming out, unwilling to comment whatsoever, even his own chief of staff. And of course, those who criticize are those that have already been written off by the president, Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski, who the president's already said he's going to campaign against her. But all the other Republicans basically wanting to avoid all comment on this. And it comes on a day, by the way, Lindsay, where the president did not appear in public. He did tweet quite a bit today, but there was no mention in any of his tweets of George Floyd on the day of George Floyd's memorial service.
Do we know what specific reforms, if any, the White House will support on reforming police?
We actually don't, and as you can imagine, it's a question that I've been asking, our whole team has been asking. Nothing specific coming from the White House yet, although we do see what Republicans on Capitol Hill are working on, talking about, and you see some ideas, including increasing transparency in terms of disciplinary complaints against police officers, making those more public, measures that would make it easier to discipline or fire police officers, and also talk, as you hear from the Democrats, of proposals that would ban things like chokeholds.
Jonathan Karl from the White House. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, Lindsay.
And for more on the politics of this moment, we'd like to bring in Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. Senator Ernst is the first female combat veteran elected to the U.S. Senate and the first female senator from Iowa. She's the author of Daughter of the Heartland, My Ode to the Country That Raised Me. Thanks so much for joining us, Senator.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Lindsay. Thank you.
So I want to start with the ongoing protests over the death of George Floyd and the calls for police reform. What kind of law enforcement reform, if any, would you support? And will you be part of your colleague Tim Scott's newly formed group to respond to racial discrimination?
I am already working with Tim Scott on a number of measures, and I really do think that this is an issue that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed not only at the federal level with what we can do, but we need to work with our state and local partners as well as any nonprofits. This is a great opportunity for all of us to come together, use our ears a little bit more and our mouth a little bit less. I think this is a really important time in our history where we need to listen a little bit more than we are talking. There are real challenges out there, and we really need to understand what they are.
Given that, using our ears a little bit more and our mouths a little bit less, what do you think of President Trump's handling of this moment?
Well, I would really love to see our country unified, and I think he's in a great position to do that as the president, pull us together. Those of us that serve in Congress are trying to unify as well. Again, there are so many issues that exist out across our country with the challenges of really pushing our economy forward after COVID-19, really working to honor George Floyd and his family by, as somebody said earlier, as a catalyst for change, making sure that we are addressing the issues that are important to Americans. And this is an issue that is important to Americans. So we need to listen to that and really find it in our hearts to understand some of the challenges that those communities with people of color are going through. It's really important that we do that. Tim Scott is an exceptional leader in this area, and I am anxious to work with him and make sure that we are finding a path forward that will work for all communities.
And just to actually go back to that, there was a recent ABC poll where only 32% of Americans actually said that they approved of his handling of this situation. What do you think about his handling?
Well, I think this is an uncomfortable situation for all Americans. This is a very tough issue that we need to wrangle with. A lot of folks that I visit with, they don't know what the right answer is. They don't know how to ask a person of color, tell me what you're feeling right now. Now is the time for open and honest conversation. And for those of us that come from very different communities, I grew up in a very rural community in Southwest Iowa. It's time for me to open my ears and really hear and understand what is going on. But we have to have those conversations. We have to have open and honest dialogue as well as collaboration if we are going to find a better future tomorrow where we have no more George Floyd incidents. It's really important that we do that. So in order to do that, we need to listen.
The president tweeted today a conspiracy theory that a 75-year-old protester faked his own fall after being pushed by a police officer. That 75-year-old is now in critical condition in a hospital tonight. Do you think that tweet was appropriate?
Well, I think that what we need to focus on certainly is facts, and I don't know the facts behind that situation, but certainly what we should be doing today is focusing on unification and honoring George Floyd. And I haven't heard nearly enough about that, making sure that we are taking the legacy that was created in this horrible, horrible murder and moving forward with that. And so let's focus on the facts. Let's find out what they are, but then let's move forward. We really need to focus on the situation at hand and how we overcome it.
But this is a moment at hand right now. And so I'm just curious, did you see the video, and did you think that he, in fact, faked his own fall?
I did see the video, but I don't believe that he faked the fall. But again, let's focus on the facts. Let's take a look at what has happened to George Floyd. And then through peaceful protests, we have heard from a number of those folks the concerns that they have. And we need to take that information, we need to move forward with it and make sure that we are doing the right thing for those that have suffered racial injustice. I think that is the point that we need to take away. We need to focus on that, focus on the facts, and let's find solutions. Let's quit trying to divide America, and let's come together as a nation and certainly provide a little kindness to everyone out there. Peaceful protesters. We certainly don't want the rioting that we have seen. I think that degrades the memory of George Floyd. I think we all need to come together again, and let's listen. Let's hear the different ideas, and let's formulate a plan to move forward.
And, you just talked about how important it is to unite the country right now. How do you think that can best be achieved during this time of unrest?
I think we need to sit down and listen. So those of us that are in positions of authority, those that are serving in Congress, those serving in the administration, I think it's important that we sit down. We are visiting with people of all sides of the situation. So we have really wonderful law enforcement officials across these great United States, and their great concern is to safeguard the populations out there. We have a couple of really bad actors that we have witnessed over the course of the past several weeks. We have communities of color that need to be heard. We all need to sit down together and really take that time in a calm manner, in a reasonable manner. We need to pause for just a moment. We need to speak together, and then we need to act. So I hope that we can do that in these upcoming weeks and truly honor the family of George Floyd and know that his life in some way did make a lasting. Again, I am very hopeful that this can be a catalyst for lasting change for many communities across the United States.
Yeah, I think many would agree with you that we need that pause in the conversation. Let's talk about your book for a moment. You write about the people of Iowa being misunderstood by politicians in Washington. What's most important for you and also your constituents that you feel needs to be heard?
You bet. So many folks characterize Iowa as a flyover state, and yet the state that I was raised in, very rural Iowa, a wonderful community. We are vibrant and rich. We provide food and fuel for the world. We are rich in manufacturing and technology, but really the values that came from my family and the community that I lived in the great state of Iowa provided the wherewithal and the intestinal fortitude to overcome challenges in my life. I want people to understand how wonderful our heartland is, the values that we have, the work ethic that we have, and truly I owe so much to that upbringing.
You also describe in your book in a very raw way your experience with sexual assault. How has that experience informed your politics?
It has most certainly informed my politics, and in a way I think that people have only begun to understand. It was not something that I shared broadly until my very public divorce a number of years ago, and it has always informed the decisions I make on making sure that we are protecting survivors, making sure that we are working for women and children and even men that have gone through sexual assault and domestic violence, and certainly working on those issues, not only at the state level. I volunteered for a number of years in college for a shelter, a women's shelter, and a hotline, but also then the legislation that I have worked on in the United States Senate. It is really important that I put resources and efforts and energies into those types of protections for those that are truly vulnerable in our populations. So it has greatly informed my decisions, and hearing from other women and men that have gone through sexual assault and domestic violence just since I have been open with my own story has been very, very rewarding, because they see that even though I've gone through a number of challenges through my lifetime, I've been able to overcome those challenges and go on to be in a position where now I'm able to influence decisions.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and for giving us your time tonight. We appreciate it, Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Lindsay, very much.
And switching gears now, the coronavirus continues its deadly spread across the globe. Dr. Anthony Fauci calling it his worst nightmare here in the U.S. 21 states are now seeing cases rise. In Arizona, some hospitals are now struggling to care for the very sick, with some being urged to activate their emergency protocols. Our Matt Gutman is there.
Tonight, Arizona's health department urging hospitals to activate their emergency plans. More than 5,000 new cases since June 1st, and now hospitals saying they're maxing out on ICU beds.
We need to really be socially responsible when we go outside, socially distance. I think there's evidence that we're not doing that.
21 states and Puerto Rico registering a rise in COVID, and 14 states, including Arizona, have seen their highest 7-day average growth since the pandemic began. The governor here lifting that stay-at-home order on May 15th, people gathering in large groups again at bars and restaurants.
Right now we're fine, but if we continue at a rate like this, we're facing a significant chance that we're going to have to shut down the state again.
FEMA saying community transmission is the highest driver of growth in nearly 2/3 of the hotspots in 31 states. Scott Felix is a 25-year-old who says he got sick after camping during Memorial Day. He spiked 104 fever and tested positive for COVID.
A lot of people that I've talked to have said that they felt like they may have already had the coronavirus, so it would be safe to go outside. I would say don't assume that.
And Matt Gutman joins us now live from Phoenix. And Matt, with much of Arizona almost fully reopened and given these headlines about the rise in cases, how are people reacting who just weeks ago may have thought, hey, we're pretty good now?
Yeah, I mean, it depends which people you're asking about. People who go out to bars and restaurants here, a lot of them say, hey, we are good. We don't know a lot of people who've been sick, and so we're going to go about our daily business, and they're super happy to be back to a semblance of normal. But the people who work at hospitals like this actually tell us that they feel safer in their COVID wards with people who are struggling with the virus in ICU beds, on ventilators, than they are out in the public, because only about 20% of the people in Phoenix, in Arizona, are wearing masks. So the people who work at hospitals and clinicians who are watching these epidemiological curves are very concerned about the future, but everybody else seems to think, well, I think we're going to be okay, because it's only the elderly and people we don't know who are getting sick and dying. But as you heard in the piece, those numbers are climbing inexorably. May 15th, the models predicted 600 dead total in the state of Arizona. This week, they're now predicting about 4,500 dead, and that number could rise, Lindsay.
Matt Gutman, live for us in Phoenix. Thanks so much for your reporting tonight, Matt. And when we come back, we're monitoring problems today as voters head to the polls in states like Georgia. But as the push to expand mail-in voting grows louder, why time is of the essence for states to make that call. A major development in the investigation on what happened to 2 missing Idaho children and what was discovered in a backyard. And our journey deep into the Amazon, one of the most remote parts of the earth where the coronavirus has found another home. As we reported last night, the epicenter of COVID-19 is now Brazil. Mounting deaths, distrust in government data, and anger have consumed the streets of that nation's largest cities. We showed you the clashes that have played out there and why some now trust gangs more than lawmakers. But what about the Amazon? As our James Longman reports, the crisis is now raging there as well.
Brazil's Amazon rainforest, a home to thousands of indigenous communities, the custodians of an already endangered resource. But now they face a new threat.
One of Brazil's major issues is its indigenous population being really badly hit by coronavirus. So we've come down here to the Amazon to head deep into the jungle to meet some of these communities. Being here, you just really get a sense how far and wide coronavirus has spread. We've been on this motorboat now for 2 hours. We've got another couple of hours left before we reach the first indigenous community, and coronavirus has struck there too. It is creeping through the jungle.
Like the rivers that run through it, the pandemic is spreading across the Amazon and to this small community of around 80 people. We meet Ana Paula on the dock as we arrive. She's waiting for a hospital boat that will soon visit. She thinks she has coronavirus.
I have had symptoms and I'm worried about my kids. My mother has asthma and my son is autistic.
I ask her how she thinks the virus can even get to a place like this.
I'm really surprised, but we've had some visitors who have not had masks. And then we have people who come from other communities and go back and forth. If someone here does get very sick, there's no way of helping them immediately.
Indigenous communities are particularly vulnerable to diseases from major population centres. Manaus, just up the river, is a busy tropical metropolis of around 3 million people, a hub of international trade and tourism. It was the first place in Brazil where coronavirus looked to be out of control. The state of Manaus currently has nearly 50,000 infections and upwards of 2,200 deaths. Now, sickness is seeping further afield. Ana Paula invites us to see her home.
Bom dia. 6 people live here. Can we have a look? Is that okay? Thank you so much.
Cozinha e quarto.
So kitchen, 4 people sleep in here.
E
and another room there with another 2
aqui
people.
é quarto que eu tô fazendo para mim.
Okay.
E para meus 3 filhos.
Oh wow, okay. So
aqui. Ajeitando.
She gets to sleep in here, I think, with her kids, and that's kind of a communal room. But I mean, you can see the issue. A family of 7, 2 families of 7, living in 3 rooms. It's quite clear that coronavirus would easily spread in a place like this. And now you feel like you might have symptoms for coronavirus. What have you been feeling?
E o olfato, como eu falei.
I lost taste and smell and I had a fever. Plus my eyes hurt. I went to the small medical station here. They gave me something to gargle, and I also take a lemon and garlic juice.
This is the help Ana Paula's village has been waiting for, a medical boat which visits just once a month. Locals wait in the school to get tested. It's also a chance for other medical needs to be taken care of, like registering new births. These villagers rarely go into Manaus. When they heard how bad it was in the city, they were scared to get help. They ended up trying to fend for themselves. Dr. Ludmila de Sousa leads this team.
Most of the healthcare workers in Manaus got COVID. I lost 5 friends in the first 2 weeks.
Are you worried about these indigenous groups getting coronavirus?
Of course I'm very worried. We lost people in these communities that are like our own. We had a lot of people die. I'm worried because we're going to go now and will only come back in 1 month. They don't have assistance here. We can't forget that there are other diseases here too. Amazonia has the highest rate of tuberculosis in Brazil. This is malaria season, dengue fever.
Behind the mask, her voice starts to crack.
We are really worried. We have been putting pressure on our superiors. Unfortunately, there has been a lot of bureaucracy. We are so sorry that we couldn't get here soon enough. We go home at night, worried that we can't help everybody.
People here feel help has come a little late. Ana Paula sits down for her test. She'll get her results before the boat leaves.
Back in Manaus, the scenes that terrify these communities continue to play out. Hundreds are being laid to rest.
This is the main cemetery in Manaus in Amazonia, and you can see the new area they're creating down there. But the difference is these are mass graves.
Neda is visiting her father for the first time since he died. She's traveled 100 miles to get here.
I only got to see his funeral by video. It was so painful. It's something indescribable to look at your father's funeral on a phone. And the worst? It's not just him there. There are another 4 people in the same grave.
When Neda prays, she prays for strangers too. Her father is buried underneath 4 other victims of coronavirus. Hundreds of people have been buried this way.
He was the best father in the world, with a wonderful smile. Everyone has a defect, but for me, he has never abandoned me.
This is not like any cemetery I've been to before. It's actually a mass grave. This is how people are buried, side by side, very close to each other, often one on top of the other. And then once the coffins have all been laid inside, they just place these blue planks over the top to make it seem like there are individual plots for a place that people can come to pray. Just gives you a sense of the scale of death here in Manaus.
Just outside the city, another indigenous group is mourning. Miqueia Moreira Kokama is just 33 years old, but he's now the chief to some 5,000 people in a community on the outskirts of Manaus.
My father was sent by Tupa, our god, and he was able to unite all our people. So I'm very proud to follow this legacy.
He's now chief because his father, Kokama, was killed by coronavirus trying to protect his people.
There were some people at the beginning who felt ill, and my father told them all to stay here while he went to get help. But he got infected and he died. The government doesn't do anything for us. They despise us. They treat us like garbage.
He may be the new chief, but emotions are raw.
From what you've told me, it sounds like he was a man who sacrificed himself for his community. He must be very proud.
My father told me, son, to make the government listen to these people, to stop them calling us criminals or invaders, at one point you must sacrifice your life. And I'm okay if it happens to me. So we have to keep our heads up and have pride in who we are.
I told the mayor of Manaus what the chief thinks of the government.
Do you think you've done enough to help the indigenous people in Brazil?
Yes, we are. I'm doing my best. I'm very tired. We try to help the whole time. We have 2 boats that go 150 kilometers. That is the part of the river that belongs to Manaus.
COVID-19 may be a modern pandemic, but it's highlighting age-old inequalities. Like marginalized communities all over the world, Brazil's indigenous people are hoping a spotlight has now been shone on their hardship, and it won't be turned off. Back along the Rio Negro, Ana Paula is getting her results. And it's good news. She's told she doesn't have coronavirus. Dr. De Souza tells us that she must be careful, as it could be a false negative, but the relief is visible. Some of the other villagers have tested positive. The challenge will be to make sure they don't spread it further.
Brazil's coronavirus pandemic has run wild through some of its major cities, and now it's spreading to the provinces. Millions of people in these remote areas are only now getting help, but it's a slow process. The fear is that coronavirus is moving much faster. James Longman, ABC News, in the Amazon.
Our thanks to James Longman for that report. And still to come here on ABC News Prime, the growing backlash against author J.K. Rowling over anti-transgender tweets, what one of the Harry Potter stars is saying now. And there have been mixed messages about the spread of COVID-19 from asymptomatic carriers. Why the infections on board the USS Theodore Roosevelt are so revealing. But first, our tweet of the day from the founder of Twitter on a new company holiday. Welcome back, everyone. As we continue to see a rise of coronavirus cases in parts of the country, we want to revisit two key mysteries of this disease: how many of us might be infected without realizing it, and also how easily those without symptoms can actually spread the virus to others. We take a look at the latest research by the numbers. You may recall the USS Theodore Roosevelt, the U.S. Navy ship where the captain was dismissed after warning about the spread of COVID-19 on board. There were cheers of support as he departed, and he was later reinstated. A new study of hundreds of sailors aboard that carrier found that 60% actually had antibodies for COVID-19. About 1 in 5 of the infected sailors had no symptoms at all, and most of the rest had only mild COVID-19 symptoms, according to the study. That's likely in part because these sailors were young and healthy. One sailor died from COVID-19 out of the nearly 5,000 sailors on board the stricken ship. 25 to 50% of people infected with COVID-19 have no symptoms at all, according to Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert. Dr. Fauci told ABC News that without symptoms, you can still spread the virus, but that we still don't know how easily they do so. One study suggests that people are most infectious 2 days before the onset of symptoms, and that an estimated 44% of new infections come from people who don't yet have any symptoms. This group is different from those who test positive but never have symptoms. Today, an expert with the World Health Organization walked back an earlier suggestion that asymptomatic transmissions are rare, saying that this is still an open question. Public health experts continue to recommend that everyone practice physical distancing, frequent hand washing, and mask wearing, even if they don't feel sick. And still ahead here on Prime, our closer look at mail-in ballots. Could this really be a nationwide option in November? And later, our conversation with musician Yo Gotti, who's been quite vocal about prison reform. But first, here are some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
A final farewell for George Floyd.
I thought we get to see forever.
Family and friends filed into his funeral dressed in white to honor the gentle giant known as Big Floyd.
In times like these, we need a savior. In times like these, we need an anchor.
In attendance, Houston's police chief and members of Congress.
George Floyd was not expendable. This is why we're here.
Former Vice President Joe Biden sending a video message for Floyd's daughter, Gianna.
Looking down, he's so proud of you.
George Floyd, who died at the hands of police, remembered by many of those closest to him.
The world knows George Floyd. I know Perry Jr.
The search for those missing siblings in Idaho potentially coming to a tragic end. Authorities say they've found human remains here at the property owned by Lori Vallo's husband, Chad Daybell, now handcuffed 9 months after the children were last seen in public. So far, the remains have not been identified. The couple married less than 2 months after the children vanished. They've so far refused to cooperate with authorities, but have claimed the children are safe. With June designated as Pride Month, Daniel Radcliffe has a message for J.K. Rowling. Transgender women are women. The response from the Harry Potter star came after the author tweeted out what some are calling yet another transphobic comment. This time, her disapproval for the phrase, people who menstruate, implying those individuals can only be called women regardless of how they identify. In a piece for the LGBTQ youth group, the Trevor Project, Radcliffe said in part, comments like Rowling's, quote, erase the identity and dignity of transgender people. Radcliffe went on to encourage fans of the Harry Potter series to hold on to the message of love the books espouse. Rowling has yet to respond.
Is confirmed.
His history made. The Senate has just confirmed General Charles Q. Brown Jr. as the first African-American Air Force service chief. At 98-0, the vote was unanimous. President Trump tweeted his congratulations. Before the historic moment, General Brown tweeted out a video message of his own struggle with racial injustice.
I'm thinking about how I can make improvements, personally, professionally, and institutionally, so that all airmen, both today and tomorrow, appreciate the value of diversity and can serve in an environment where they can reach their full potential.
And welcome back. It is primary day in 5 states today, and many are calling it a dry run for what an election might look like in November. In Georgia today, reports of machine problems in Atlanta and the surrounding suburbs and people waiting hours in line to vote. The CDC says that health risks from in-person voting are real. Back in April, more than 6 people in Wisconsin got COVID-19 after voting in person or working at the polls. And tonight, ahead of November's presidential election, there's a growing call to give more Americans the option to mail in their ballots. But as our Devin Dwyer reports, time is of the essence.
Long lines, face-to-face voter check-in, and shoulder-to-shoulder ballot booths making some voters this year uneasy.
I'm kind of close to that age group that they say don't go out. And I have asthma, so I worry about that.
Diana Hood, a 61-year-old Texas school teacher and political independent, says she wants to vote by mail in November to avoid the risk of COVID-19. But under state rules, she doesn't qualify. In Texas, only voters over 65 with a disability or illness, in jail, or traveling overseas can apply for a mail ballot, one of the strictest standards in the country.
Basically, well, the fear of COVID-19 is not a reason. However, if there is another justifiable reason, so I mean, I guess you could lie, but I probably wouldn't want to do that. You don't want to do that. But it just other states can handle it. Why can't Texas?
At least 6 states are preparing to automatically send ballots to every voter this fall. California joining the list last month, citing the pandemic.
I signed an executive order about an hour ago that will allow every registered voter in the state of California to receive a mail-in ballot.
In Nevada today, for the first time, voters had to mail or drop off their ballots. And in Georgia, the Republican Secretary of State shifting the election to almost entirely by mail, with a record more than 1 million absentee ballots already received. In 2016, a record 1 in 5 Americans voted by mail. November numbers could far surpass that.
But with COVID and just the significant expansion of the number of voters opting themselves in right now across the country, I think that number is going to be much higher than that. I think it could approach 100 million.
That's roughly half the electorate.
Yeah, I think it could get that high. It could even go above that.
But ramping up mail balloting typically takes years to plan. Election experts say states and counties considering expanded mail voting this fall need to decide now.
Those are the sorts of decisions that have to happen in June, like this month. It's not a September decision. It's not an October decision. It's literally right now to make sure election officials can adjust.
Companies that print the ballots in envelopes say there's a danger they won't be able to meet increased demand if orders come too late.
If counties sign up, if we get full, we're full. We can't add more equipment. We can't add more people. We can't add more space.
At Rumbeck Election Services in Phoenix, one of the top printers in the country, they're already churning out ballots around the clock. More than 9 million ordered so far.
And everything has to mail by the middle of October. So you're talking a 4-week window of getting all the mail ballots produced, getting them out in the mail, voters getting them, mailing them back for the states and counties to be ready to tabulate.
There's also a worry a crush of mail ballots could overwhelm states that haven't planned ahead for the election night count.
We're used to knowing who the president of the United States is by some time on the evening of the election, but that's predicated on knowing who wins all the battleground states. And if you have states like Pennsylvania, like Georgia, like Wisconsin, like Michigan, that if expanding mail-in voting in a significant way, it could delay the count.
The CDC is urging all states to use mail-in voting as much as possible to minimize direct contact with other people and reduce crowd size. But some states are pushing back, citing financial concerns and lack of equipment. Tennessee appealing a court order to give all voters the option to send in ballots. Many top Republicans are skeptical too. RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel told Lindsay last month she worries about the potential for fraud.
We want to make sure in this time of uncertainty, every American is able to vote safely, but we cannot derail the safeguards that ensure election integrity. And having governors sending ballots to inactive voters that have moved away or passed away does not ensure election integrity.
But there's no widespread evidence of voter fraud, either in person or by mail.
There's always going to be the potential for fraud. There's always going to be the potential for abuse, but it just hasn't been borne out by the evidence in the places that have expanded vote by mail.
And while President Trump claims mail-in balloting doesn't work out well for Republicans, researchers have found no apparent effect of mail-in voting on election outcomes, calling partisan concerns overblown. Back in Texas, a key 2020 battleground, mail-in voting has landed in court.
There is no reason, capital N, capital O, no reason that anyone under 65 should be able to say, I'm afraid to go vote.
Voter groups have sued the Republican-led state government to make vote by mail available to everyone. But so far, state and federal courts have blocked the effort.
This idea that we want to give you a disability claim because I'm afraid to go vote if you're under 65 is laughable. You have more chance of being in a serious auto accident if you're under 65 on the way to vote than you do from catching the virus and dying from it by voting.
Nearly a third of all Texans who have died from COVID-19 were under the age of 65. Diana Hood says she's prepared to vote in person, even if it means risking her health.
I could go early and sneak in during the day when there's not many people there. I guess my feeling more than anything is why not? Why can't we have that option if people want?
And Devin Dwyer joins us now from Washington. Devin, we're learning that one reason for the long lines today in Georgia is because some voters said that they never received a mail-in ballot, underscoring, of course, the importance of preparation.
Yeah, I mean, extraordinary scenes in Georgia, Lindsay. Georgia officials had hoped to avoid a crush of in-person voting because of the pandemic. But one of the state's largest counties, Fulton County in the Atlanta metro area, said they had trouble processing a record crush of absentee ballot applications. That led to some voters not getting them in the mail. And of course, the only other alternative is to show up and cast that ballot. That's partly why we're seeing those lines today. And officials also struggling with social distancing at those polling places, delayed openings, computer malfunctions, all of this perhaps a foreshadowing of what we could see come November.
Right. And in states like Texas, how vigorously do they check the validity of reasons given for why a voter might actually need a mail-in ballot?
Yeah, well, when you send in that absentee ballot application, state officials do take a look at the excuse you check there on the box. But the bottom line, Lindsay, is it's really an honor system. State officials in Harris County, Texas, one of the largest there, as you saw in the piece, said they don't have the manpower to go and investigate everyone. You heard Diana, our voter, said she doesn't want to lie. She's going to be honest. I think most voters will be honest with the system. But advocates are saying that the excuses are very subjective and that perhaps if you have an illness, you have a disability, you could see perhaps risk of COVID in that category. But at the end of the day, it's very much the honor system.
And with so many states that have different rules on this, how would you know if you even qualify to vote by mail if you're worried about COVID-19 and waiting in those long lines?
Well, most states, almost all the states, 46 states allow anybody right now to vote by mail if they're concerned about coronavirus. So that's the important thing to remember. That's almost all of us in this country. There are 4 states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, and Tennessee, where voters are challenging those rules in court. The legal challenges will still play out. But the best advice is to go to vote.org. It's an independent website. Check out what the rules for absentee balloting are in your state, and you can apply there as well and get that ballot if you need it. Lindsay?
Certainly some helpful information there and insight. Devin Dwyer, thank you so much as always.
Thanks, Lindsay.
And when we return, our conversation with rapper Yo Gotti. Stay with us. Joining us now is a man whose music that you have likely heard over the years. Songs like Down in the DM, Rake It Up, and one of his latest, Pose. They have a lot of people certainly bobbing their heads. But right now, the rapper behind those infectious hits, he's focusing his attention, his passion on his other main interest besides music, social justice. So please welcome to the show musician and activist Yo Gotti, who, to borrow from his own lyrics, is here to break it down and back it up. Thanks so much for joining us, Gotti.
How you doing? How you doing?
So first, as someone who has been speaking on the issues now at the forefront of the national debate for years, especially policing and criminal justice reform, share with us your thoughts about recent events. What's been the toughest part for you and your family?
I mean, just, staying educated on all the things that's going on, and being a black man, being a successful man, and having kids and family members who come from a certain culture, just, trying to make sure we not, I don't want to say dodge some of these situations, but we're living with them every day. So, just trying not to, be a victim of it, one, as well as trying to spread the information to not see other victims of it.
And I'm just curious, because you mentioned your children. What do you say? What's the conversation that you're having right now in your household?
Well, my kids is more like, I try to have open conversations with them to understand them, what they think about what they hearing and seeing, as well as giving them, information from a father, my opinion on what I think is going on, or just information that they can use if they ever in a situation without me.
And before these recent events, you had been working specifically on the issue of prison reform, calling attention to the deplorable conditions of the Mississippi State Penitentiary, known as Parchman, providing legal assistance to inmates along with Jay-Z and Team Rock. Tell us more about Parchman. What's been going on there, and what's the latest on the lawsuits that your team is pursuing?
Parchman, that's a whole issue of its own, of just, a prison facility that's treating human beings like animals. And they live in inhumane conditions. And I think when this whole corona thing happened, it kind of took some of the light off of what was going down there in that facility. But, actually it's making it even worse. So now they got to deal with the coronavirus, and, it took some of the light away, but we still own it. We still own it and trying to fight it and get, better conditions down there.
You've had some close family members incarcerated before. What's a common misconception, would you say, about the criminal justice system and the people who get caught up in it?
I think the common misconception is that people still human. Even though they're in prison, that don't mean that you can treat them like animals. You can cage them away, throw them away like they don't exist. So I think, and a lot of times people that's in prison, they shouldn't even be in there. You know what I'm saying? They're in there for the wrong reason, or they just waiting on trial, or waiting on court, or waiting on bond, or can't make bond. So you can't you got to treat all humans like humans at the end of the day.
If your microphone could reach out and the politicians or the legislators, the people who could make the change, if they could hear directly one call of action from you, what would it be?
One call of action to be treat all humans like humans, as well as you're in a situation like Parchman, where you're a prisoner in jail, or you dealing with police brutality or racial issues on the street and not getting the fair justice.
Distrust of the police within the black community has a deep-rooted, long history. And with cases like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the list goes on and on. It's not difficult to see why that distrust may continue for some while. But what role do you think that music and hip-hop specifically can play in bridging that gap?
I don't know if it could bridge the gap per se, but I think we can spread the information. I think it's a lot of people that listen to us, watch us on a day-to-day. I think we can try to educate people on what's going on, spread the information, because luckily some of these things are, and luckily probably not the right word, but some of these things are getting captured on video. So we able to see it, but you got to think about all the cases that you don't have a video on, how many police brutalities or racial things that happen every day that don't get caught on a video. I guarantee it's way more than the ones that we seeing on video.
Right. And you're someone who has a reputation in the industry for being really hands-on, especially when it comes to the business of making music. And just yesterday, Republic Records, a major record label, announced that it is doing away with the term urban, citing it as an antiquated term that marginalizes black artists. What are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts is I don't know why urban was actually ever a category or word because, you know, when you talk about hip hop music, this is the most popular music that's out, right? So whether you're a suburban kid or middle class, how are they structured? You know, I look at all people as people, you know, no matter how much money you make, what your race is, where you live, but however they break it down in categories, everybody listens to hip hop. Hip hop the most popular music, so I never understood why it had to be urban music or any type, and it's just not music.
As a superstar rapper, you've, of course, performed all over the world for all different kinds of races and cultures. And considering that, the power that you have, what is the message? What would you say is the most important thing that we could learn from each other right now?
I think people pulling together, you see a lot of people pulling together, but I think we just have to keep spreading the education, keep educating each other and learning from each other and spreading information that, you know, that you can learn something about something you didn't know that was going on and having open conversation with your friends, whoever, you know, and educating each other and pushing each other to do more and stay unified and try to, you know, get the best outcome in every situation.
Gotti, we thank you so much for your time and for joining us tonight.
I appreciate it.
And before we go tonight, our image of the day, a police officer in Camden, New Jersey, and his new partner taking a little break from work to pose for this adorable picture. And that is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.
What you need to know right now, the World Health Organization warns the pandemic may be worsening as new daily COVID cases worldwide hit a new high, as George Floyd is laid to rest amid ongoing nationwide protests against systemic racism and police brutality. On the coronavirus front lines of one of Virginia's hardest hit cities, the mayor of Richmond is here, the statewide moratorium he's calling for on evictions, and what a judge just ruled about taking down a Confederate statue there. Flying in the pandemic and staying safe.